So good evening, everybody. This is Michael Watson, and this is the virtual chapter of IACT IMDHA. It is March 14th. That is Pi Day, 3.14, so everybody should have some Pi before the day is over. And we have a very special guest tonight, and my friend Will Wood is here to talk to us about beliefs, and we'll be getting around to that shortly. I just do want to let you know that you can get CEUs if you're a member of IACT or IMDHA by just going out to their website, whichever one you're a member of, and logging in with your member ID. And then there's a little screen that pops up where you can indicate that you spent an hour online with us, and you want to make sure that they give you credit where credit is due. So, by the way, the fact that it only feels like a half an hour, you can get the whole hour anyway, because you're good enough and you're smart enough, and doggone it, people do like you. Next Sunday night, at this same time, is part of the IACT and IMDHA presenter series, where we've been talking to people who are presenting pre- and post-conference programs at the Hypno Expo. It's coming up on May 19th through the 21st on Daytona Beach. And our guest for that Sunday night evening, same login as this, by the way, everything, so you can just keep that information, will be Dan Cleary, rather interesting fella, and he's talking about communication is more than just words. So if you have an interest in language and NLP and hypnosis, it should be a very interesting discussion. And I mentioned just in our pre-talk here that I'm exploring creative realities as part of a book and a video project that I'm working on. And as part of getting that going, I'm going to be offering a 2-day course facilitating past life regression and therapy on April 29th and 30th here in Orlando. If you want some information about that, you can email me at flhypno@outlook.com, and I'll be happy to tell you about it. But the whole creative realities thing in the long run includes several programs and webinars ranging from shamanic journeys and deep trance identification and mythological lives and healing practices and all kinds of groovy stuff. So thought I'd let you know about that. And by the way, I have muted everybody, but you can unmute yourself effortlessly just by down at the bottom left of your screen. I think there's a little microphone. You may not see it until you pull your mouse down there, by the way. On some screens it pops up at that point. But if you see a little microphone there, it's got a red line through it, and that means that you're muted. But if you, when it comes time for questions, you can just take yourself off of mute and be able to ask a question. I also wanted to know if there was anybody other than Will, because we're going to concentrate on you in just a second, Mr. Wood. But if there's anybody else that has anything that they want to announce to the group. This is, unlike the Sunday nights, this is a chapter after all, and hopefully we can get a little connected to each other. So if you got something going on you want us to know about, feel free to say so. Speak now or wait until next month, as they say. Is that how they say it? Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay, so, well then, I am pleased as punch to introduce to y'all tonight Will Wood. Will is an international trainer of NLP and hypnosis. He has trained and motivated and inspired audiences, gosh, in just about everywhere: San Francisco and San Diego and Austin and Houston and Dallas and Denver and Fort Lauderdale and Miami and Daytona and Salt Lake City and Atlanta, Georgia, and Chicago and Albany and San Jose, Costa Rica, and Trujillo, Peru, and Lima, Peru, and Cusco, Peru. All that good Peru stuff, by the way, that I want to talk to you a little bit about. Sure. He has an office in Ogden, Utah, where he teaches dynamic classes and helps clients create powerful personal and professional change since 2009. He's been teaching and certifying people in NLP and hypnosis through 2 universities in Peru. And also, as I mentioned, doing some training in Costa Rica. He's frequently live on Facebook, and one heck of a great guy. So hi, Will.
Hey, that was yeah, thank you. It's really good to be here. I'm excited to chat just a little bit.
Well, this is an important, very important topic here because, in fact, Tim Scher put out a thing the other day that I saw. You know Tim, right?
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, sure. and and he put out a thing the other day, and I think the title of it was "Is your how did he say it? Is your BS keeping you stuck?"
Right.
BS being his abbreviation, of course, for belief systems.
That's right.
And here we are talking about beliefs. So I'm ready for that. And I think something I'd like to just get our terms kind of square to begin with. Our beliefs just, I always think that beliefs are just really sort of glamorized opinions, or are they something more?
Well, I think there's lots of different ways to describe it, but I think what I'm talking about when I talk about a limiting belief is I basically am talking about some kind of thought that is supercharged by emotion that impacts behavior. In the if you've ever seen what I call the cognitive behavioral wheel, and I'll just draw it out here for the group. Give me just a quick second here.
Sure.
Or what I sometimes call the T wheel. So I've got T written out here.
Mm-hmm.
Draw this out. Now you have thoughts. Thoughts tend to create an emotional response in the body,
mm-hmm.
and that emotions will lead to actions, except that everything kind of acts on everything else, right? So you take a new action, the action can generate a new thought, or the action itself can generate an emotional response. So what I tend to think of as a belief is just really a thought that generates an emotional response.
Nice.
And sometimes when you're doing work, like when I'm working with a client, we might not see the belief right away. We might see the evidence of a belief. So for example, before we started recording, I was talking about the massage therapist who literally could not receive the money that her clients would pay her directly into her hands. Well, we're not really seeing a belief there, but what we're seeing is an action that is related somehow to an emotional response. And that emotional response is most likely being generated by some kind of thought pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, as I'm working with clients, one of the things I'm looking for is I'm looking for, what are the actions that my client needs to take in order to create the kind of breakthrough that they want, whether it's a breakthrough with money, like the massage therapist, or whether it's a breakthrough in a relationship where they want to connect in a different way with their partner or their spouse, or whether it's something to do with a personal goal or some kind of health breakthrough that they're doing. What keeps someone from losing the 10 pounds that they want to shed, or the 50 pounds or the 100 pounds. And all we might see is the action. They say, well, I just can't stop myself from eating. Well, what's causing that person to do that? Yeah. Probably some kind of thought, some kind of emotional response. Sometimes the client isn't aware of the emotional response. Sometimes they're not aware of the thought, but all they may have is the action. And so for me, dealing with limiting beliefs is a really practical matter, right? Thoughts lead to action. Thoughts lead to emotional responses. And when we can identify what the thought component is, when we can identify what the emotional component is, we can make a really powerful change, or help the person create a really, really powerful change in their life.
Sure.
So,
I'm sure, by the way, you've seen people for weight loss that have something going on that's kind of like, in my family at a certain age, people tend to put on a whole lot of weight.
yeah.
And they may not even, and like you said, they may not even know that they have that thought. They simply have that kind of awareness from their experience. The world has borne that out. And they wouldn't say, well, gosh, I believe that, or I even have been thinking about it consciously.
Yeah.
But it gets them. I want to raise the question that Catherine posted here earlier, because I think that this is kind of where we're going to. She mentioned that sometimes people have the fear that they don't want to be found out as a fraud.
Yeah.
And she was asking, is that a mistaken belief?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really common one. And I deal a lot with performance coaching in the sales world and the entrepreneur world. And so, which is a large proportion of my clients. And it's really common among people who are even very, very successful. It's not the most common belief, but it's certainly up there. I would call this an extension of the I'm not good enough family beliefs, right? Or it's a flavor. It's, one of the 50 flavors of the I'm not good enough belief, or I don't deserve this type belief. And so is it a mistaken belief? Well, I guess it depends, right? Like, what are you doing that you need to be?
Are you a fraud, in fact?
Are you a fraud, in fact? But if the person isn't a fraud, or if they're doing their best, or if they're providing a valuable service, then I think the answer is yes, it could be a mistaken belief. And that thought can create a powerful emotional response that leads to all sorts of weird behaviors in clients. So that would be one that I've dealt with a bunch. And Catherine, I don't know if that answered your question, but now I think the question was posed in regards to money in particular, because we're talking a little bit about money before this started up.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, I don't know that it's the only belief that shows up with money, but it certainly would be one that I would find in the healing space or in the change worker space. Like, for example, this belief that people are not good enough or don't deserve it, which is kind of this idea about being a fraud, or some flavor of that, leads people, for example, to go through hundreds of certifications. Well, if I just get one more certification, then certainly people will know that I'm a good enough coach or a good enough change worker, and I can actually help my clients produce change. And so we see people going through that. I got caught up in that loop for a while, needing one more certification. So
we could teach a certification course in fraudery.
In fraudery, yeah.
that would really make it complicated for them.
Yeah.
I wonder in the approach, just as you're starting to lay this out here, and what you showed us on the chart.
Yep.
Do we assume that what it is that's got our clients blocked in the first place is in fact a belief? Is that usually what the case is, or is this something that you search for, or how do you know when that's what you're dealing with, or if it's something else?
Well, it's a great question. So,
or what else could it be?
I never assume anything. I think that one of my general approaches to doing work with clients is to model out their experience, right? If we look at NLP at its basis, and NLP and hypnosis would be my two primary modalities, probably not real different than the way you practice, although we probably practice different because you're Michael and I'm Will. We've had different life experiences and different set of teachers. Although Michael, you were one of my early NLP teachers, and I thank you for helping me along in my early journey.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, especially. So as we look at it, my approach to working with a client is to model out what they want. And really, if I could boil all NLP down to like a sentence, I would say NLP is modeling. And when we're doing change work with a client, we're doing nothing more in the beginning, especially, than modeling. We're modeling out the desired state, and we're modeling out the present state. And then we're noticing where there's a gap between the two. So for me, when a client comes in, before I leap in to do a technique, what I start to do is I start to ask the client about what they want. So when a client comes into my office, usually one of the first questions that I'll ask something along the lines of, what do you want to put on the agenda today? Or what do you want? And if the client is not clear on what they want, I'll spend time really helping them break that down and to get clear, because until a client wants something, it's really, really hard to do any kind of effective change work. Now, sometimes when they show up, they show up telling us what they don't want, which is a great first step, right? So I don't want to feel so anxious. I don't want to have money problems I'm having. I don't want to have the relationship that I've got. I don't want all this state. And from there, they're telling us a little bit about the present state, and we make a bridge into the desired state. And so then we just model that out. Now, once we've got the desired state all modeled out, then we might ask a question like, well, what's stopping you from already having that change? And then we can go back in and we can start talking about what comes up. And what the client tells me in response to that question or other questions along those lines is going to tell me, what are we dealing with here, right? And, really, there's only a few things that people can bring up. They're going to talk about thoughts. They're going to talk about emotions. They're going to talk about behaviors that they're doing or not doing. And I'm making a map initially of what the client wants, what they, where they're at now. And then we start to look at, where are the gaps? What's different over here than or what's missing over here that would help them cross the divide. And quite frequently, I'm going to bump into some kind of limiting belief. Probably the two most common things that keep clients from already having achieved their desired state is going to be a limiting belief or a conflict, which you could, in a conflict, you could look at as competing beliefs or competing values.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I mean, how often does it show up? It's not the only thing that shows up, but gosh, I bet it shows up in the 80% of the client work that I do. What about you? I'm curious. I always wonder what other people bump into.
Well, I think I just enter into your matrix through a slightly different route, because typically what happens is that when people come in, they've shown up in some sort of distress, whether that's the word that they would use or not, but a sense that the way things are is not the way that I want them to be.
Right.
And in that discomfort, there's usually some emotional experience that presents itself, and when they get in touch with that emotion, so I'll enter the matrix there.
Yeah.
Then my question is, where is this going to take us, and what needs to happen to get you there? And you're quite right. My experience is that what do you have to believe in order to have this experience? Because it's predicated on believing something. Like for instance, smokers, and they'll tell you when they come in, they say, gosh, I've tried to quit and I just can't quit. I'm somebody, right?
Yeah, I can't quit, or I've tried everything and nothing has worked. Yeah, or with weight, a lot of people will come in and they'll say, well, I'm a Smith, and the Smiths just can't lose weight. I mean, it's in the genes, right?
Yeah.
Which
it usually is in the genes, around the waist.
Around the waist, usually. Hopefully they're wearing jeans.
Yeah.
But so beliefs come up quite frequently, and so then the question is once you find a limiting belief. So, I mean, the first thing I do is I'm making this map of what somebody, whether we start with present state or desired state, we're making this map of where people are at and what they want and what the gap is. And again, usually we're going to pinpoint a thought, an emotion, or a belief. What's the problem? Well, the problem is I feel anxious all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They pinpointed the emotion. Well, what's generating the anxiety, or how do you know that you have the anxiety? And now we're going to pop into the second piece, which is, evidences. So wherever somebody enters into the cognitive behavioral wheel, when they show up on the present state, whether they're presenting and they're complaining about the actions that they are or aren't taking, the thoughts that they're having, or the emotional response that they're having. At that point, what I'm looking for is basically to keep it simple. I'm looking for two things. Now, if we had more time, I might show you what I call the house of belief, which is a model that I don't know that I really invented anything inside of the model, but it's a really handy model to describe what happens inside of a belief. But there's a simple model, right? So what is a belief? A belief is the thought and the emotional content. And so if I start to break the belief down into its pieces, first off, what piece of it are they aware of? A lot of times they're just aware of some of the emotional content. And how does the emotional content tend to show up? Well, it tends to show up, if they're aware of it, either as a body sensation. So we're back to BS, right? And it shows up as a body sensation, or it shows up as some kind of emotional label word, or in NLP, we might call it a nominalization, right? So the person's either going to say something like, oh, well, I've got a pit, so I have anxiety. Well, how do you know? Well, I have this pit in my stomach, or I have this pounding in my chest, or I have, this pressure behind my eyes. Or today I had someone say, my feet get cramped, right? Which would be just evidence of a body sensation. Or someone might say, well, you know what anxiety is like. And they kind of jump back on the label bandwagon. Or as I'm talking to someone, I might just notice that they do something like this. Well, I've got anxiety, and they give me a gesture, and they give me a voice tone, and the word is marked out in the sentence as extra emphasis on it. And so sometimes they're just going to give me, the emotional content, which again is body sensation or some kind of label. Now, if they give me the thought component and I go, well, how do you know you have anxiety? They might go, oh, well, every time I go to the grocery store and there's a lot of people around, I start to get kind of panicky inside, right? And they might give me another gesture, and mark out a word. So they're giving me now a representation. They're giving me an internal representation, which is really what a thought breaks down into. And then I might go, well, when was the last time this happened? And then they're going to go, well, it was last Thursday when I was at the grocery store. There you are at the grocery store. What's happening now? Well, there I am, and I see a woman pushing a shopping cart, and I say to myself, oh no, she's going to come talk to me. So she has visual content,
right,
followed by some internal dialogue. And so the thought component of a belief can really be broken down into, and I'll jot this out, but it can be jot down into, what do you see? What do you hear? Right? What do you say to yourself? And it might be broken down into some kind of metaphor that shows up in language, or some kind of image or symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what the belief breaks down into. So once I know that, once I'm zeroing in on the content, I want to start to break it apart into its pieces. And before I necessarily try to change it, I just want to find out what the client's doing in their head.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll have one thought, and sometimes they have a whole list of thoughts as evidence for the belief.
Well, and by the way, what I liked about just that particular example is that right at the beginning, the first word in the belief as you spoke it was every time.
Every time.
You know, right. So it wasn't, there's an example in here's something that happened in my experience, but here is something that happens in my experience. It's a statement about life, you know, in that kind of an ongoing way. She may think that it's a law of the universe as opposed to something that she does, you know, herself, but
right. Well, and that's the thing. So we're looking, and you've got it. So linguistically or non-verbally, our clients are going to tell us how the belief is put together, right? I had a client the other day who said, oh man, what did he say exactly? It was beautiful. I was doing a workshop on meridian tapping, right? And I can't do meridian tapping without layering in what I know about suggestion, right? And this was a group of people who were being exposed to meridian tapping for the first time. And a guy comes up for a demo, and he says, I've got anger. And he did this. And then we were talking about it again, and about a minute later, he said it. I said, so when, and so I fed it back to him. I said, well, tell me about this anger. And I gave him the gesture back. And then he did it again. He says, well, I'm talking to my wife. She sees me, and I just get this anger, right? And it was like he was holding it, right? So he was giving me a nonverbal representation of his anger. And I didn't know exactly what that was, but that was really useful information. I knew that he literally kept it right here. Mm-hmm. All I had to do to have him bring it back is to have him move his hand up and do this. And his anger response, you could see it. He'd start to flush in the face, and his speech patterns would start to change. So he was showing me some kind of thought that was very unconscious. But when he brought it up, it was showing me how the belief was constructed.
Sure. My tendency there, it reminds me of the Sandlin hand thing that I know you've heard me talk about, because what I would want to do is to take hold of his wrist and say, well, tell me what happens when we put it up here.
Yeah, right.
You know, and just notice if he starts to describe a change relative to that. It's a powerful metaphor.
Oh, super powerful metaphor. What we had him do after we did a couple rounds of meridian tapping was we just had him take it and toss it. Right? Yeah. And it was that action alone was really powerful. And one of the things I was watching for as we were doing the meridian tapping is I was watching for when I said, now tell me about this anger, right? And I was looking for it. And at one point, he, instead of coming back to it, he dismissed it, right? He said, oh, well, that's not a big deal anymore, right? But it was this that showed me that the change was starting to happen. And I go, no, but really, get it back. What's this like? Oh, no. And he said, no, I can't get it back. Right. And so the gesture change, it told me that there was a change. But however it happens, when we're dealing with belief change work, again, I'm looking for evidence of the thought, evidence of the emotion, and what are the evidences that show up? They're either going to be some kind of behavioral manifestation, or it's going to be some kind of thought manifestation that's broken down into some of its parts and pieces. Now, if you look at thoughts as being the proof and the evidence being the body's response to the proof, when some people have a belief, it might have a very simple construction. They might have one image that's stuck in their head that drives the entire belief response. And some clients might have 50 evidences that generate the belief hologram, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not a belief. It's not as simple as doing a one-line reframe, because if you reframe one piece of it, you've only taken one little piece of the puzzle and changed it. You go, wow, well, that worked last time. Why isn't it working this time? Well, the reason it's not working is because you've got lots of evidences that build up the belief state that the client's in. And so even if you change one piece of it, the rest of the part of the puzzle hasn't changed. And so there's more work that needs to be done. And so you might need to go through and identify all of the different thought proofs, which oftentimes show up as in terms of memories that the client has. They can remember specific instances where it's come up. Maybe they're traumatic, maybe they're non-traumatic. Maybe they can recall them consciously. Maybe they need a little bit of help through hypnosis or through some kind of timeline re-imprinting process or whatever it happens to be, but something to pull out the unconscious content. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not a memory at all. Sometimes it's a hallucination about the future. I had one of those earlier today. Well, I'm getting an anxious feeling about me and my husband. Well, I asked, well, tell me about that. What are you noticing? And she said, well, I'm seeing, so she tells me which representational system she's going, I'm seeing an image of myself 20 years from now, all alone. And he's left me for another woman. And I said, well, has he actually left you for another woman? No, it's just the image that I'm creating. It's not a memory. The anxiety feeling or the belief is really something that she's projecting out into the future. And so rather than go back in time to clean it up, we're actually going forward in time into her imagined reality. Right. That's creating the distress, and then we're introducing changes inside of that. And maybe we'll do a visual reframe with some modalities, or maybe we'll do a linguistic reframe and help her see. What I actually did is I helped her move 50 years past that image and look back, right? So it was a perceptual position, a temporal perceptual position reframe, right? Yeah. And she goes, oh, and it just popped. It was like, oh, now that I'm 50 years past it, look, I see that I made it, right? Yeah. Yeah. And bring that sense back to now that you have the ability to work through things, even difficult things.
Just to stress this a little bit with regard to the hypnosis involved, because in a sense, she says that she keeps seeing this. It was just an image that came to her.
It was an image that was coming to her from her future.
So as though that's what happens when people are in hypnosis. Essentially,
no orientation in time.
What I see is exactly her hypnotizing herself, and future pacing a reality that certainly is something that she didn't want, right. And yet something that gosh, if she keeps doing that, she could actually manage to create that future for herself pretty easily.
Well, we all do, right? We get an image of our future, and then we pace ourselves into that reality. And we see it first, and then we create, or maybe we don't see it, but we experience it on some level representationally, and then we start to move ourselves in that direction. I think that hang on, let me grab the book. But two of the most fascinating books that I think I've read, and let's see, where's my other one? I think my other one's at home, so I think you guys will have to just deal with me talking about the other one. But this is a really really fascinating one for those of you that have this. Yeah, very fascinating book. I don't practice hypnosis the same way as Walensky does, but it's talking about basically the whole premise of this book is that hypnotic phenomena is what generates client symptomology, right? So yeah, we're talking about what's the structure of anxiety. Well, it depends on the client. Some clients might be remembering old traumas and bringing them into the present moment, putting themselves into a trance. Right? Because essentially in my world, anything that is not connected to right here, right now, on some level is operating hypnotically, right? If, for example, I can tell a real experience that I had around money. Now, first off, I have to preface this by saying, I think my mom is an earth angel. I really mean that. Like I in terms of moms, I lucked out. I really feel like I got the best one that I could have had. And all parents are, I think, doing the best they know how to do. And I can say I have 6 kids, right? So I know that I'm doing the best I can, and I have a therapy fund for my oldest kids, that are my practice kids, But I remember one time walking in to my mom, and she was crying, and this was late 80s, We had just bought it couldn't be late 80s, had to been early 80s. I was about 8. We had just moved into our red home up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And my mom was crying. I've never seen my mom like that. My mom's usually very stable emotionally and very gentle. And she was really like crying, like really visibly upset. So as a kid, this was like, wow, this is unsafe. And I go up and I go, Mom, are you okay? And she looked at me. She put both of her hands on my face, right? So there I am, looking up at her. She makes eye contact, staring down deep into my soul. And she says, no, son, we are poor. Now, what had happened is that they had just finished building a house right before the housing market crashed. And now Dad was paying 2 mortgages, with a bunch of little kids. And so there really wasn't enough money for food, right? Now, we had enough. I don't know how we survived, but we made it. But I didn't know all the backstory. All I know is emotional charge, and all of that energy transferred down into little me. So I carried around this belief for years that really wasn't even based in reality. We eventually sold the house. Things kind of stabilized and returned back to normal. And we never went without, always had clothes, always had food on the table. Maybe grandpa or grandma had to help for a little while while Dad was trying to sell the second house or whatever. But, eventually we got it all worked out. But I carried this belief around, I am poor. We are poor. The Wood family's poor.
Yeah.
For years that came from this really highly charged emotional response. And it wasn't really until my 30s that I identified, where is this coming from? Because I would start to get around money and I do all sorts of weird things and to push it away or to, really had some dark feelings about money. And really a lot of it came back from that moment of identification with mother's distress. And it took really rewriting that experience for me. So sometimes the anxiety might be coming from the past. And here I'm gesturing to my past, probably to your future, right? But, the memory might pop in from the past. Or you might have a client like my client earlier today that said, well, I'm seeing this image of myself in 20 years being alone and I've been abandoned. And that's the representation that's driving the trance. And so we have age regression and we have progression or pseudo-orientation in time.
Nice.
Right? Yeah, that's creating that. So if we start to look at the structure of the belief trance that our clients are in, it also gives us clues about what we need to do to resolve their belief trance.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, by the way, it occurs to me. So, and I know that we're right about at the end of your.
I have a few more minutes. Well, I can go for 5 more minutes if we need to.
It does occur to me that the statement of "we are poor."
Yeah.
Any kind of identification statement or identity level statement like that. I don't know if my generalization is too big or not, but I'm wondering, aren't identity level statements beliefs in the first place?
Yeah, of course. Identity level statements are, they fall into a type of belief. Now in NLP, we like to give things complicated names, right? So we call that a complex equivalence. I am, or we are, that's like we equal poor, right? Mm-hmm. And in my mind, that translated into I am poor, which is I equal poor, or I am the same thing. So now, how do I know it's a belief? Well, in Will's world, a belief really comes back to a thought that is amplified by the power of an emotion somehow,
sure.
Right? Or it's this part of the cognitive behavioral wheel. Mm-hmm. Maybe all I saw for a while was the push away behaviors I do around money. And so that was the evidence that there was a belief in it.
Yeah.
But I've got a thought and emotion. Well, what's the thought? Well, the thought was an unconscious memory. Or maybe out of consciousness memory, meaning it wasn't necessarily buried or repressed content, but it wasn't something that I was consciously thinking about in the moment.
Sure.
But when I really started to focus in on it, that was the image or the memory that came up as a symbol, as at least as a symbolic representation for what was coming up for me. I was entering into the I am poor trance, remembering my mother's distress primarily,
mm-hmm.
Emotional distress when money would come up. And so what needed to change? In that case, I had emotions, but the emotions, the body sensations that came up around that were being generated by this thought process. And so for me, it came down to what in NLP we'd call re-imprinting. For those that are more classically trained, they might do some kind of regression, right? But it was a regressive type interaction that actually was able to help me release or reframe the emotions and the content inside of that memory until I could have a healthier belief.
Mhm.
right? And a more well-rounded view of what was actually going on. And to take it from an identity level, I am, right, down into, oh no, this is a situational thing, and we made it, and I can have peace around money, right? I can, right? Yeah. And so, or for another really interesting case, I remember working with a young man who came in for weight management, and he had a belief, I am fat. And this was before I started doing NLP, and I was doing.
He had a belief that you were fat?
What's that?
He had a belief that you were fat?
Yeah, that's right. He had a belief that I am fat, which might not be too far off from the truth, right? Will, you really got to lose some weight. Well, I know. I'm working on it, man. I'm working on it, It's baby fat. Every time my wife gets pregnant, I gain a little weight, right? So, which actually is true, but that's a whole other conversation, which is evidence of some kind of belief, right? Something is going on, right? But he came in and said, I am fat. And he had this, which is again, NLPEs would be complex equivalence. That is an I equal fat, right? I am the same thing as fat. And he had this belief that his family was fat. And I started off by using what I thought was going to be a regressive technology, but I said, drop down inside, feel the feeling. And I said, go to its source. I assumed he was going to go back in time, back to his dad telling him he was fat or something. And I said, what's happening now? And he says, oh, and he just burst into tears. And he says, oh, but here I am 50 years old. And this is like a 25-year-old kid. He goes, I'm 50 years old sitting on the couch and I can't even stand up.
Mm.
He had built a future reality. He had future paced himself into being like some of his relatives. But his belief did not originate from an image in the past. It really was a powerful vision of the future that he had created for himself unconsciously, which is fascinating. Now, I don't always use regressive technology when I'm dealing with beliefs, but this is a fascinating case where we got to model out the structure of the client's thoughts and notice, how is the client generating the belief that they have? What's the representation like? And once you have that trance, once you identify the trance, whether it's a trance from the future, a trance from the past, a fantasy that the client is generating, whether it's self-talk, now we have the key that we can use to open the door to help the client make the smallest change possible inside of that to create the greatest effect. Sometimes all you got to do is change the brightness of a memory. Sometimes you need to do something silly and simple, like tap it away. Sometimes you take it out and you might spin it away, right? Sometimes you might re-imprint it, or you might send a resource into the image. Sometimes you might do a gestalt dialogue. Sometimes you might just change a point of view or change a perceptual position. Sometimes you might just do a witty linguistic reframe. Sometimes you might agree with them and expand it and make it worse, right? Like we do in provocative therapy. So there's lots of different things that you might do, but the question is what's the smallest thing that I can do? What's the smallest change that I can introduce into this trance that they have that renders the trance harmless, or changes their point of view, or opens up a gate for new possibilities? Fascinating.
Lovely.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah. So listen, buddy, it's time for you to go.
Yeah, I gotta go.
I mean, I'm not kicking you out, but you've got.
I gotta run. I gotta pop on my
to be in another world, in another reality. So.
I know.
So
I gotta teleport to another location.
So because the mics are so muted and stuff, just on behalf of the folks that are all out here, I just want to tell you thanks so much for being here. You shared a lot with us. I think it was really useful information, and I will send you a link so that you can check it out, because I think it's really good for you to listen to yourself talk sometimes.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Well, I want to say it's been an honor to be here, and it's for me. I really learned so much from you early on in my career, and the work that you did with me reshaped the way that I do my client work. And there's a few people that have influenced me more than others, it's a pretty short list. I mean, there's lots of people who've put little bits into me, And then there's a few that have really done a lot. And Michael, you're one that I really respect and I look up to. And I feel like you've contributed greatly to my client work. Dan Cleary, I think you're talking to on Sunday, is another one who really has had a lot of influence on me. And so we're in good company here. And I just really appreciate the work you're doing to help everybody, sharpen the saw just a little bit, get the skills just a little bit sharper, or get good reminders on things we already know. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much.
Yep. Talk soon.
See you soon. Well, all right, everybody. The remarkable Will Wood. What a pleasure it was to have him on the call. I'm looking at the clock. He really did seem to run all the way up to the end. We've got officially 2 minutes left. So there's something that I want to say, and I don't know if it's like way after the fact, but I did get a question from Catherine earlier that we just skipped right past, and I'm sorry, Catherine, but we've got to do what we got to do and get it all in. But it was an interesting one, and I think it's worth sharing. It's worth sharing just in terms of the content of the question. She says she had a client who, by the way, are you just not wanting to talk? Because it would have been an option for you. But she says that she had a client who wanted to move on from an ex. And he said, I want to, I need to. But in the next breath, he would say that if she asks him back, he's going. By the way, I have a friend, like I know this person. Maybe my friend is your client. But finally, she says he could see that he was in love with love, and his ex was not in the relationship. When he got there, he could let her go. So she was asking, by the way, the question behind it was, so how do you handle situations like that? I think just the way that you did. I think that's absolutely right. Is that you reframed the belief, because by the way, he had it hooked up that the only place that he could get that from was her.
It took so long.
Yeah,
it took so long
to get in there.
And he'd come back every week because we've been working on confidence and self-esteem. And he'd go, but why is it taking so long? Why am I here for so long? I was wondering whether there were some insights of how to get it. His head was saying one thing, but his heart another.
Well, I'll tell you what. In my toolbox, there is a lovely technique that is specific to this. And if somebody comes and presents this to me, I think it would be my almost go-to thing. I mean, I'd check to see what was happening and to make sure that it was appropriate. But Stephen Connie Ray Andreas developed a technique that I believe may be described in The Heart of the Mind. I'm not sure what book it's in or where it can be found, but it's the technique is called releasing enmeshment. And it's really kind of cool. It honors the relationship, it honors the other person, but it also it invites them to visualize just a quick description of it, and not as thorough as I'd like, but a very quick description would be you ask them to visualize that other person and to sculpt a holographic model of them in space in front of them. You want to do this in physical space. So they go all around, they get it. So you've really assisted them in hallucinating, which is one of the things that we really enjoy doing. And then you ask them to think about the enmeshment or the connection, how they see that, because they understand we're talking about metaphor. So some people see it as like we're sort of tangled together in some net that we can't get apart. Other people see sort of a cable that connects them to the other person, or they're tied in some way. And where that connection is, whether it's in their head or heart, or it could be their genitals, it could be anywhere, So how that is. And then you ask them, and I think this is what brings the beliefs out. You sculpted it with their magical laser hands, I mean, it is sort of an imaginary technique. So then you tell them that they can use those magical laser hands to sever that connection. So you ask them, you say, but don't sever it just yet. What I want you to do is just start to sever it, just as you're about to sever it, and stop just short of that, and find out what happens. And some are like, well, if I cut it, then this, or then this would happen, or then that would happen. And you get to find out what's all the sort of underlying stuff.
But and In fact, that's what happened with this gentleman, where he started to get that realization. He became avatar, you know, how they join each other. And that's how he described how he and his ex were. And he was able to somehow do exactly what you described. And he was able to sever the tails or whatever they do in the avatar. So
well,
that was interesting.
And then the rest of the technique, after you've severed the connection, that they finally decided that it's okay to do that, is that you tell them that while you have them, first of all, construct sort of their future self as well, the same way that they modeled that that other person over to one side to sort of construct their own future self. And while they're doing that, you point out to them, once they're done, they say, I've got it. That's how I want to be, after I've moved on from this relationship. You invite them then to sever the connection, letting them know that while they were building their ideal self, the partner, the one they're disconnecting from, also has created next to her or him an ideal self as well. So you ask them to sever the connection and then to connect them to their ideal self in the same way that they've been connected to that other person.
I like that.
I like it very much. And once in a while, I've had a client who said, well, I don't want to be entirely disconnected, but they seem to be satisfied when what I let them do is to send some kind of a connecting arc between the two higher selves, rather than their person to that person.
Yeah.
So you can continue to honor them, love them, respect them, all of that stuff, wish them well. In fact, I think that's one of the most important things to do if you're going to let go of somebody, because, by the way, if what you do is you hope nothing but badness happens for them for the rest of forever, well, then you really haven't disconnected, have you?
Exactly. I like that, Michael. I'm going to write that down. That's really good.
Well, thank you so much. So, okay, we are beyond our time by 4 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. We will be on the air on the second Tuesday of next month as well. And at that time, we will have Tim Shore on the line. And let me see what the actual title of his talk is. He's if you don't know Tim, he's in Indiana. He's just one of the most dynamic hypnotists that I know. He is really a brilliant business guy. I mean, he's seen more clients than anybody that I've ever met. He runs a school of hypnosis and also a therapeutic center. And so it's going to be a business talk again. And what he wants to talk about is secrets for skyrocketing your practice on a limited budget. So for people that are trying to build their practice and stuff, you want to be here the second Tuesday of next month at this same time in Bat Channel. Use the same login that you used for tonight, and you'll be able to join us. And also the Sunday night programs, for those of you that are interested in the IACDIME DHA Presenter Series, continue also just like tonight, starting at 8 o'clock login with an 8:15 start. And this coming Sunday, we'll be talking to Dan Cleary about communication. So now I am going to unmute everybody, because I always do that at the end of the call, so get ready. And we can just all say goodbye and good night. And that's all been done. So it's lovely being here with you. We'll see you all next time.
Night. Thank you, Michael. It's been great.
Michael.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
night. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I had audio problems, Dr. Watson. Thank you so much for these teleconferences, your wisdom, your infinite inspiration and insights. I just can't thank you enough. I'm sorry. I'm the one that dares to come in with the unstable bandwidth. I apologize. I just don't call in. I'm sorry.
Oh, that didn't really hurt us at all. That's just a problem on your end, Jasper. So don't let it keep you away.
Oh, thank you. God bless you all.
All right.
It was a thrill, Michael.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night, Michael.
Night.